Hi, I'm Allie Hamilton, and I'm so happy to welcome you to the Come As You Are podcast. Every week, we'll be talking about some aspect of healing, usually around childhood wounds and complicated familial relationships. The topics will always coincide with my personal essay of the week, and this will be a place where we can take a deep dive together. I'm so thrilled you've joined me and delighted for you to always come as you are. Hi there. Hi there. Welcome to our talk. This week, the topic is the space between us, understanding the third thing. And this talk is really all about relationships and a key idea, a key moment for me that shifted the way that I think about relationships and the way that I show up in relationships, and just something that was incredible, like a light bulb moment for me that really made such a huge difference. And basically, I was writing this week about a number of different relationships that had such a big impact on me. And the main one, of course, being the relationship I had with my own mother. And I've talked about this and I've written about this a lot, but my mother, we had a complicated, challenging relationship because she was an alcoholic and she wouldn't face that or address that or acknowledge that or admit that or get any kind of help. Because in her mind, there was no problem. The only problem that existed was my perception that there was a problem. And if you've ever loved an alcoholic, then you might already know that usually there's a system in place. And it's very common that alcoholics are going to attract other alcoholics because then they can drink together, and enablers, people who are going to make the behavior acceptable or okay. They're not going to confront, they're not going to challenge, they're not going to sort of like throw themselves in front of the alcoholic and, require that they get some help or that they look at it. And so that's what happened in my household, at my mom's house. She was such a strong personality. She was really like, my mother was like a force, not just in my life, but in anyone's life that she touched. She was just the kind of person who walked into a room and you could not miss it. She really commanded the space, and she was beautiful and kind of glamorous. She was always done, head to toe, just done. And smart and funny and engaging, and had so many wonderful, incredible qualities. She was a good friend to people. She was the kind of person, if you were going through a crisis in your life, there was always, a couch available for you at our house, or depending on who was living where. Once I went to school, there was a room available. So she was that kind of friend, but it was very challenging to be her daughter. And I think part of that had to do with her age. She was 24 when she had me. I think also a number of things happened after she had me that made it challenging. My dad cheated on her, and I think that really broke her in some deep, painful place. And I'm not sure she ever fully recovered. I think that was a large part of the drinking. She'd also lost her dad at 13. My dad was 20 years older than my mother. And I think there was some of that in play in their relationship, where she might have felt like she had sort of that father figure back, and then he didn't start cheating on her until she was pregnant with me. So I think there's just like this underlying, probably unconscious sense that I had ruined that relationship for her. And when she drank, that is the rage that she would sort of unfurl on me. And so I had a unique relationship, with her. The rage really was directed at me continuously over years. And so she got remarried, and had my brother with my stepdad when I was 11, and her ability to, you know, be a different kind of mom. By the time she had my brother, she was 36. She was in a different marriage. She was just at a different place in her life. And so, but for me as a kid, I didn't understand that. So it just looked like she could be affectionate with him. She could, you know, run the PTA and show up at his school and do all of these things to make sure he had what he needed, and in ways that she never had for me and couldn't for me. And so I really did have the impression that it was me, you know, that there was something broken at my core, something unlovable about me. And it deeply impacted my feelings about myself, you know, self-esteem. I was constantly trying to live up to her very high expectations. She was a really controlling person. I think that when you have had trauma in your life, sometimes that is a pretty natural response, is to try to prevent that, you know, being hurt or blindsided again. So you're just like pinning everything down and telling people what they have to do and who they have to be and how they have to show up. And so my mother, like, she had demands, you know, certain demands that needed to be met and certain expectations. And if you did not meet them, it was a huge problem. And so for me, what that felt like and looked like is, you know, my mother would regularly, starting from the time I was 7 or 8, and all the way through the rest of my life, she would drink to the point of, you know, certainly slurring, often not being able to stand up and walk without help. Her whole demeanor would change. If she got enraged, which happened very frequently as I was growing up, her face would get twisted. She would get, she would come after me. And she would come after me emotionally, but also physically. I was little, you know, and so it was intimidating. And I'd be up against my wall cowering, you know, holding my arms up over my head, trying to understand what I had done to upset her to that degree and how I could avoid upsetting her like that in the future. And so I tried to be perfect. You know, I had straight A's. As I got older, I had serious, like, eating disorder and body dysmorphia, and it was just never enough. I really developed a huge perfectionism in response to just trying to be enough, you know, trying to earn her love, approval, affection, which I could almost never get. She was not one to heap on verbal praise. She was not affectionate with me. So mostly what I got was this feeling that I was not good enough. And I believed, if you had met me at 16, I really believed my mother didn't love me. That's genuinely what I thought. I don't believe that anymore. But I did at the time, and I did, you know, prior to that. I think that I really struggled with that feeling. And so when I went out into the world, and I'm not even touching like all the stuff with my dad, because that was a whole other circus. But when I went out into the world, I found myself being drawn toward relationships with people I could never please. You know, I could never be quite enough. And there was a lot of this sort of like bait and switch, which maybe other people I'm sure have experienced, you know, where the first few months, like, amazing, the person's like wildly in love and thoughtful and caring and in your face and in your space, and then once they have you, it kind of turns. And I ended up in at least 2 relationships like that, where it was so painful, and all of that old stuff was at play for me. I was certainly trying to rewrite history and get my happy ending. You know, if I could just be enough for this person, then I would feel lovable, all that stuff. And, you know, if you read up on attachment styles, which I think is really useful for anyone who's thinking about relationships and patterns in relationships. In yoga, we call them samskaras, right? Like repeated action, joined action. So a groove that you might be in that you repeat and repeat. And if you can look back on your life, and particularly since we're talking about relationships today, if you notice any kind of patterns like this where you are often doing most of the giving and the other people in your life are doing a lot of taking, or you're always chasing, at a very anxious attachment style. And that is generally usually a result of a lot of uncertainty in your family of origin. So if you grew up feeling like you didn't know what to expect from day to day, and if you grew up in an alcoholic household, or you grew up with a primary caregiver who maybe had like a personality disorder that made it hard for them to feel empathy, or someone who was volatile, maybe they were usually great, but they had a temper that you just never knew when it might erupt. Anything along those lines creates a lot of uncertainty for a kid, where you just don't know from one day to the next what you're walking into. And if that resonates for you, then chances are you may have had at some point, or may have right now, an anxious attachment style. And symptoms of that can look like, if like rejection is a big hook, somebody rejects you, it can really feel like death, and if you find yourself chasing after people in your life when they're upset, or if you find yourself asking a lot of the time, are you okay? Are you okay? Is everything okay? Are we okay? Are things okay? What's wrong? If you find yourself in relationships with people who have an avoidant attachment style, sometimes that is something that you might find yourself drawn to. And that is one of the worst combinations as far as pairing attachment styles. The anxious attachment with the avoidant attachment. Of people who are avoidant, they have a fear of intimacy. And sometimes that happens when the primary caregivers for that person, they just weren't able to attach properly and consistently. There are other reasons, but where intimacy becomes a smothering experience for someone, so that as they go out into the world and start having their own relationships, it's like, ooh, wait a minute, I don't want to get too close, because then I'm not going to have my own life, or I'm going to lose control, or whatever. So that is not a great pairing. That's probably going to lead to a lot of pain. Now, one of the great things about attachment styles, since I started talking about this, is that they're not set in stone. So you might come out of your childhood and head into your young adulthood with an anxious attachment style. It doesn't mean you're stuck with that for the rest of your life. The great news about human beings is we are malleable, we are teachable, we're not stuck. You can learn, you can grow, you can heal, and you can start to feel better about yourself. And when you feel good about yourself, when you like who you are, you might not be like, but when you genuinely at the end of the day can kind of look yourself in the mirror when you're brushing your teeth and feel like, I know I'm a good person. I know I'm doing the best that I can. You're going to be less interested in relationships that make you doubt that. You're not going to be attracted to people who want to tear you down or make you feel like, unsure of yourself. You're just not going to be drawn toward those unhealthy relationships where there's a lot of uncertainty, drama, chasing, fear. People who are emotionally abusive, say things that are really cutting, knifing. You're not going to be interested in that kind of interaction, or someone who doesn't want to make you feel secure in the relationship. Those relationships are going to lose their appeal the more you feel better about yourself. And a good pairing for people generally is anxious attachment style with someone who's got secure attachment. What does secure attachment look like? It's usually someone who's either done a lot of work on themselves and, feels good about who they are, knows that they have a lot to offer, and is generally just, at ease in their own skin. If someone like that connects with someone with an anxious attachment style, that can be very healing for the anxious person, because it's just consistent. It's consistent love. It's, there isn't this fear that's in play all the time, and that anxious person can start to relax and, open and trust. So just to know that these are not like etched in stone. You're not forced to carry around your attachment style for your whole life. The things shift and change. What happened for me is, a number of things happened, but one of the first things I think that was one of the best things is I moved 3,000 miles away. When I was 29, I intuitively, I think, understood that I was not really going to be able to untangle. My mom and I were so tangled up in each other, and I think our histories, I grew up like in her, not even in her shadow. It was like, the trunks of our trees were connected and the branches were intertwined and there were weeds growing all over the place. And I really couldn't pull myself out of that sphere of her influence when I was living in New York City, which is where I was born and where I grew up. As long as we were living in the same city, it was like I was seeing her all the time. Boundaries, I started to know in my mid-20s that I needed boundaries, that I didn't want to be around her when she was drinking. I tried multiple times with my mom to talk about this stuff. She was absolutely unwilling to admit that she had a drinking problem. Her friends would say she was a social drinker and I was sensitive. And that's how I grew up. I was labeled as overly sensitive. They called me Sarah Bernhardt, and that was the brush that I was painted with and what I was consistently told about myself. You're overly sensitive. There's nothing wrong with your mom. She's a social drinker. But a lot of these people who were saying these things to me didn't see what would happen later, when she would come home, or, what was happening when she would be enraged with me. They weren't seeing that. So it was really, I would say, a very gaslighting experience to grow up in, where you're having these experiences where someone is where the rage is flying at you, and it's just never enough, and the person is, just saying things and doing things that are scary and confusing, and to have everyone around you say, there's nothing wrong with this person, it's you, it's hard for a kid, and so I came out of that and I really had no trust. I didn't have any self-trust. It's just like, I thought, well, there's something wrong with my perception, I guess, because this feels really not okay to me, but everyone around me is telling me it's fine and it's me. So if that speaks to you, what that can look like is anytime anything happens in your life, going to all of your friends and saying, is it just me, or is this, whatever it is, like having to have 20 conversations about things that are confusing because you don't know yourself, whether you're correct in how you're feeling or not. You just doubt yourself constantly. And because I had such a core belief that I was like unlovable at my, that there's something broken in me, I was drawn toward relationships where that was going to be reflected back, where I felt like I've got to bend over backwards or dance like a monkey or try to figure out how to be exactly what this person needs so that they don't leave me, huge fear of abandonment, and so that I can earn love. And, those are painful relationships. Those are not relationships that are going to go well and end happily. When you are not being yourself because you feel like yourself is not good enough and you're trying to be enough for someone else, or you're trying to figure out, it was like I was always hacking the code. What does this person need? And I was always attracted to people who needed help because I knew how to do that. And so what does this person need, and how can I be that for them? How can I provide that help for them? How can I offer that healing or that, love? And there's such a danger if you are becoming close to someone in thinking that your love is going to be enough to heal them and solve their problems and make them happy. You really sure you've heard this before, but just in case, you cannot make another person happy if they are in turmoil at their core. You're not going to be able to fix that or solve that, no matter how wonderful you are, how loving you are, how perfect you are. You're not going to solve somebody's deep-rooted self-doubt or self-loathing. No one can do that for anyone else. We all have to do that work for ourselves. And I'm not someone who thinks you've got to love yourself before you can love someone else, but I do think you have to like yourself. I do think that there's got to be some sense of like, I know that I'm doing the best that I can. I may have my issues and I may have things that have happened that have affected me and, maybe make it challenging for me to trust or to open or to be consistently, loving, but like I'm doing the best that I can. I'm aware of my stuff. I'm working on it. I'm accountable. If I make a mistake, I know how to say I'm sorry. I know how to talk about this. I'm working on it. I think if you're in that space, then you can be in a loving relationship with someone because you're owning it. And so there's the background for me. When I was in my 20s and into my 30s, this was not an overnight. It wasn't like I went to this screening and then the next day everything was, solved. I don't think that exists in the world. It's just that I went to the screening and what I saw really impacted the way that I was thinking about relationships and helped me tremendously. And that was in combination with a lot of other things. Therapy for years, certainly my yoga practice. And in my yoga practice, a big part of what shifted for me was that self-trust. And, what that was like I'd be in, for example, Warrior 2, right? And ideally you got a 90-degree bend in that front leg. Your back leg is fired up. You're playing with this energy of like grounding, like sitting down into a pose, but also lifting up out of it. There's a lot going on. But what it would look like for me is, okay, I think I'm in a 90-degree bend. Now let me put my hands on my body and see if I'm in a 90-degree bend. Okay, I'm in a 90-degree bend. Like that's kind of how stripped down I had to get with like trusting myself. It wasn't, it was like, I'm going to be in my body right now and I'm going to feel what I'm feeling in this moment. And if I think I'm in a 90-degree bend, I'm going to double check and make sure that what I think is real. And that's kind of like how I had to start, just trusting myself and trusting my ability to perceive what was happening from moment to moment. And that is some ground floor work there. That's like, you're kind of, right there at the ground. And that's what I needed. I just had to kind of rewire my system so that I didn't have to double check if I had a perception that something felt off or not okay or not acceptable or not something I wanted to be around. I found myself a couple of times in relationships that I thought, well, they're not that bad, so how can I leave? Like, is it legitimate for me to leave, to end this? Just me not being happy wasn't enough of a reason. If the person hadn't done something really awful, then I felt like I shouldn't. How can I hurt this person? There was no sense of like me in the mix. Like, what do I need, or what lights me up, or what makes me happy, or what's exciting, or what's interesting? There just wasn't any of that. That wasn't even in my mix. Okay, so I had been in a couple of really painful relationships, and I ended up at a screening of a film called Hedy and Yumi Crossing the Bridge. And it was based, and I think you can find this film, by the way. It's a documentary, and it's about this married couple, and they teach these workshops all over the world for other couples. And imago therapy is the system that they're sort of teaching, and the primary idea at the heart of Imago therapy is that relationships, if you and I are in a relationship, that relationship it doesn't live inside of me and it doesn't live inside of you. It lives in the space between us. And I'm responsible for what I'm putting into that space, and you're responsible for what you're putting into the space. And together we're co-creating this third thing that we call our relationship. As soon as I heard that, it was just giant light bulb going on in my brain, of wow, that is such a beautiful and important way to shift my thinking about what a relationship is, because it first of all, when you can think of relationships as a third thing that's sort of separate from you, you're part of co-creating it for sure, but it exists outside of you. It gives you that space where you're not taking things personally, and you're not trying to manage the other person's experience, feelings, needs, wants. You're really acknowledging, I'm a person, they're a person, together we're creating this thing between us. And, I have my own needs and my own ideas and my own ability to contribute whatever I'm going to contribute, and they have theirs, and we're going to see what we create together. And it could be, if you show up in a space with someone and they are consistently putting their rage between you, or their pain, or their list of ways they've been wronged, their resentment, their boredom. I mean, that's not really a space you want to stay in, right? I mean, hopefully, if you're feeling good about yourself, you're like, I don't think I want to co-create a third thing with this person, because they just seem to want to hand me all of their pain, all of the things that they haven't processed. When you have two people who come into a space who are at least doing work on themselves, who are aware, I have my stuff, you have, everyone has stuff that they're dealing with, and a history, and times they've been hurt or confused. We all have our things, but there's a willingness to co-create a relationship where there's conversation, communication, an open exchange of ideas, freedom to be who you are, accountability when you maybe do put something into the space that isn't maybe the greatest, because you're having a tough day, which everyone does from time to time, or when you become really intimate with other people. And I'm not just talking about romantic relationships, but friendships. Anytime there's vulnerability, that's usually when your insecurities are going to come to the surface. And knowing that you're safe, knowing that you don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to get everything right all the time. And it's okay if you have a bad day or a bad week, or you're going through a tough time in your life, because this person can be there with you in that space. There's enough of a foundation there to sustain. And so it was this beautiful shift in my thinking. And with my mother, what had happened is I had already created a geographical space there between us. I realized at a certain point, if I stay in New York and I'm seeing her all the time and she's drinking and I'm dealing with that, and I'm, constantly getting migraines because I feel like I have no power in the situation. If I want to be near her, then I have to deal with the potential that she's going to get falling down. I don't want to subject myself to this anymore. It's how can you heal if you're constantly throwing salt in the wound? And so I moved myself physically to California, and then we had 3,000 miles between us. And that space, I already knew, this was before I knew about Imago therapy. This was before I had sort of had this shift in my thinking, but I had experienced already that creating that space between us also created a much healthier environment for our relationship. I kind of pulled myself away from her so I could figure out, who am I? I'm not just the child of an alcoholic. I'm not just my mother's daughter. I'm also my own human being, but who is that? I really didn't have a good sense of that because I'd been so immersed in that, so entangled in that relationship with her. And it was constantly triggering for me that, and this was something I was writing about, because she refused to acknowledge that she was an alcoholic or that there was an issue, she also didn't like to have uncomfortable conversations. She was not accountable. If she raged at me, she had the absolute expectation that I would like forgive and forget, and not confront, not challenge, not question, there just wasn't going to be a conversation no matter what happened or what she did or said. My job was to process that on my own and show up the next day and treat her as if she was a great mom. And as I became my own person, my own adult, that was becoming really near impossible. I didn't want to accept a false version of reality anymore. And her false version of reality is I'm not an alcoholic and there's no problem. I just couldn't do it anymore. It was making me literally sick, physically sick, emotionally sick, mentally sick. It was making me ill to try to practice the cognitive dissonance that she was requiring for me to be in a close relationship with her. I just couldn't do it anymore. And so I'd already been struggling from the time I was like 25 to 29 with her, trying to figure out. I asked her to go to therapy with me. She came to like one session and just that was not going to happen. She just wouldn't go there. She wouldn't talk about my childhood or the things that had happened or the way that she had raged at me. Like, she wouldn't have those conversations. And it's very hard to heal when you can't have a difficult, when there is no space to have open, honest communication. It's really hard to solve things together and to move on. And so I was kind of, instead of healing the relationship with her, I was maneuvering around the alcoholism, and moving 3,000 miles away helped. And so I was then able to have a lot more power in the space because I didn't call her if it was like after 5 o'clock in New York City. That was not a time that I would either call her or answer my phone if she called. I figured out how to like call her at a time that worked for both of us, much earlier in the day in New York and a good time for me here in LA. So I'd speak to her several times a week. I would text with her a lot, but I was able to mostly avoid the drinking and just have a relationship with her where I could tell her what was happening in my life. I had to be careful. I could never confide in her about like deeply painful things because I had learned the hard way that eventually she would drink and she would use those things against me and go for my jugular. So it limited us a lot, but at least I had some ownership over like what I was gonna subject myself to or not, how to keep myself safe and still have her in my life and still love her and still have her know what was happening in my life, know what was happening in her life. She was a terrific grandma. My kids absolutely loved her. She loved them. But I was, even with that, and has got a lot better with that move, I still, would go back to New York at least. The first few years I went back 2-3 times a year. I was so homesick. But eventually I would go back like twice a year, and she would come out twice a year, sometimes 3 times. Sometimes she'd come out for a long weekend. So she was in the kids' lives. She was in my life. But when those visits would happen, there'd always be a night where she would get falling down drunk. And, that was hard. And as my kids got older, I really did not want them to see that or know that or have to deal with that. So it was an ongoing, it never went away, it never got better until the very end of her life. And, she got ALS, and eventually she couldn't swallow, she couldn't speak, she certainly couldn't drink. She was sober for the last, year of her life. And that is when, those last few weeks of her life, we really got some serious healing done, which is one of the things I'm most grateful for in my life. Is as devastating as it was to lose her, and it was and it is, I'm so grateful that the last few weeks she and I were finally able to, I think she just finally, and I sometimes laugh because my mother was so tough, she was never wrong. And I think it wasn't until she was literally on her deathbed that she finally acknowledged the problem between us has mostly been my drinking. Like, you love me, I love you, and the main problem between us has been the alcoholism. So that, but I want to go back to this concept of relationship happening in the space between us. When you think about being a human being, right, you're in relationship with everything. So certainly the closest people in your life, this comes into play. And it's such a great way. You can just stop, after this talk and think about the relationships in your life and the closest relationships in your life and what is in that space between you and the other person, and I mean, I'm instantly thinking of like the closest women in my life and what that third thing looks like and feels like. Those are relationships I treasure. Obviously, it's the same with my children, with my husband. Like, you have an opportunity to really think about, what am I putting into that? How am I showing up, and what am I putting into this space, and what are we co-creating together? And is there trust? Is there laughter? Is there openness? Is there safety? Because that's always what I'm trying to create. I want the people in my life to feel fully free to be themselves. I want them to know whatever they feel or whatever they need, they're safe to tell me. I may not like everything. I might not feel comfortable. I might have my own human reactions that I need to go and deal with, or resistance or fear. All those things may be true, but I never want anyone in my life to feel like they have to edit out what they're thinking or feeling, or needing or wanting, because they don't want to like hurt my feelings or disappoint me. Like, I don't want that. I want the people in my life to show up as themselves, to come as they are. And because that's when you feel really loved, right? When you are free to be fully yourself and this other person has me. They love me. They're here for me. Nothing I say or do is going to change that. I mean, that's like extraordinary and the best stuff in life. And so my relationships I treasure them. They're more important to me than anything. And I'm going to guess you probably feel the same way. Like, that's the best stuff in life, is the connections that we make. And I take this stuff really seriously. So those are like the closest relationships in my life. But then there's also the relationship I'm going to have, with the person. And I was talking about, like, Time Cafe is a restaurant nearby. And just even like walking in and ordering, I'm having a relationship with the person behind the counter. And it might be a relationship that only lasts a minute, but like, what am I going to put into that space while I'm there? I could be scrolling on my phone and barely looking at them while I order. That's one option, but that's not an option that I choose. If there's another human being on the other side of the counter, and maybe they cried themselves to sleep last night, maybe their boss is being really difficult today, maybe they just went through a breakup. I mean, who knows? I don't know. But certainly when I have an opportunity to have an exchange with another human being, no matter how short it might be, I want it to be, at least I want to show up with the best of myself. Do I do it every minute of every day? Of course not. But I certainly try. That's certainly my intention as I'm going through the day. And it's part of the reason that I have a daily meditation practice and a yoga practice, is so that I can work through my own stuff and then go out into the world with like the best I have to offer. Again, it's not perfect. It's a practice, some days are hard, but that's certainly my intention. And, I don't know if you've had this experience. I'm sure that you have, where you're just going about your day. Maybe you are having a tough time, and you have an exchange with someone in an elevator or in a waiting room, or, at the pharmacy when you're online, and it lifts your spirits, I think that's so beautiful. And I ideally always want to be contributing that kind of energy to a space between me and anyone else. And I know for myself, if I'm going through the day and somebody holds a door open or is kind or lets me merge in traffic, I know it might sound like an overstatement, but it really isn't. It restores my faith in humanity, for a little while. When people are lovely and considerate and kind, it really just makes you feel so good. Like, okay, good. it makes a big difference. And the reverse is true. When people are thoughtless or rude, or, can't be bothered to like make eye contact when you're having an exchange, that's a bummer. That feels bad. So the way we're interacting with each other really has such a huge impact on the way a day is going to feel. And when you think about your life is just a series of days that you're putting together. And if you can focus on each day, that's a lot more manageable than, starting to think about like your whole life. If you just focus on, okay, what can I do today that is going to increase the sort of like joy quotient around me? What can I do as I'm going through the day? I certainly know it has a huge impact on me when other people are being mindful that way and putting great stuff into the space. And if you are having a tough day, that can really turn things around. So I'm always trying to, be aware of that. I'm in a relationship everywhere I go. When I'm driving, I'm in a relationship with other drivers on the road. And, you see people, I don't know if you drive in traffic a lot, but when someone cuts you off, you can take that personally and get angry and let your blood pressure go through the roof. Or you can just like slow down, give that person a lot of space and realize that's just where they are. Maybe that's always how they drive. Maybe that's how they're driving today because there's an emergency. Who knows? We're never going to know, but you don't want to let other people's behavior affect your blood pressure. And you certainly don't need to be taking it personally. If somebody cuts you off, they've probably already cut off 20 people behind you, and they're going to cut off 20 people in front of you. It has nothing to do with you. And that's another part of thinking about relationships as a separate entity, as a third thing, is it makes it a lot easier to not take things personally. Nobody's going to get everything right all the time. We're all going to have our days where we're feeling challenged, or we're feeling less than, or we're feeling, whatever it is, like something didn't go exactly the way we wanted it to, or we're just feeling down or, tested, and maybe we're not going to show up with the best of ourselves. To not take it personally when that happens, to try to give people the benefit of the doubt, is so much easier when you are not, when you're recognizing that there is some space here and that maybe somebody's struggling in that space today. And you can feel it when someone is struggling. I mean, if you're paying attention, you can feel when someone's having a tough time. You don't have to take that on. You don't have to take that in, but you can certainly extend some compassion in that person's direction, or offer them a little extra patience, or, not get yourself embroiled in something that is probably coming out of them and their experience in this moment. You don't have to get drawn into it. So I think there's a lot of freedom when you start to conceptualize relationships in this way, and to give people the space to not get it right all the time, and to let things go. I really think life is so short. You don't want to be holding on to a list of grudges in your head. It's just not that is not a great, you don't want to give a lot of space to that stuff. It's not productive. It's not going to help anything. So it doesn't mean you don't have standards for the people in your life. If somebody's consistently showing up in this space with, treatment that just doesn't feel, then they're not for you. They're not your people. You're not their people. It's just not going to work. But you don't have to take it personally. You just sort of say, okay, I'm moving on. I'm going to go co-create with other people. And this is not a good fit. What I consider to be reasonable to show up with, they have different ideas. Our ideas don't meet up, and that's okay. And so it gives you a lot of freedom in that sense as well. And the other thing that I wanted to touch on is that we're not just in relationship with other people, we're also in a relationship with our own bodies, with ourselves, with, the world at large. We're in a relationship. We're in a relationship with money. We're in a relationship with time. We're in a relationship with our own work. I'm going to tell you that I wrote the essay this week, and I didn't give myself as much time as I like to. Just a, holiday week, kids are home, schedule's all off, And I really like to give myself at least a couple of days to be working on my weekly essays and not like a day. That doesn't feel good to me. So, and if ideally I've got a few days to be like writing it and then coming back the next day and editing it or, and so I didn't have the time that I wanted this week and I didn't feel good about the essay. I really was like struggling with it and, almost didn't want to publish it, but my husband's always like my first reader and I trust him, thankfully. And he was like, it's great. Just change, this thing is a little confusing here and just wrap it up at the end and you're good, And so, but I have a relationship with my work, with my writing and with my, my teaching, and there's that whole idea of how you do anything is how you do everything. And so just to watch that, because I can be highly critical of myself. And, sometimes that perfectionism or that, type A, sort of like really high expectation can get in my way when I'm trying to create. And this is the second time that I almost didn't publish an essay and then I published it and the response has been like incredible, And so it's me. It's me. It's my relationship with my work that I have an opportunity to look at, and think about and maybe try to shift a little bit or trust more or, so that, that's just an example of like being in a relationship with your own work and to give yourself some time to think about that stuff. What is my relationship with time? Are you late all the time? Like what's my relationship with nature? Like, do I get out in nature? Am I, when I go for a walk, can I leave my phone at home or at least put it in my pocket and look around and breathe in and, just to really consider like all the different kinds of relationships in your life and the way that you're showing up in that space, as a way to maybe just give yourself a little more freedom and ease. I think that when we are experiencing life like it's happening to us, it can be overwhelming. You can feel besieged, when you are thinking of it as like, I have an opportunity to show up in these, in whatever ways that I'm choosing. I have a little room to do that. Your feeling of power in a situation increases, and not power over people, just your own sense of like standing in your, in your own feelings in a present way and like showing up with the best that you have to offer. And the last thing that I wanted to touch on is this idea of what do we owe people and what do people deserve? And I think that with our parents, this can be a really key thing to think about. And what I'm talking about is, for example, like my dad, I did not have a good relationship with my dad. He would have said we had a great relationship, which is kind of amazing, right? Like the way that people perceive things. I allowed him to think that we had a great relationship because that was easier for me than trying to have, he was another person who like, would say he didn't even remember things. Like I would, the only time that I tried to talk to him was in my 20s, in my early and mid 20s, I tried to have some conversations with him about what had happened. And he was not able to do that either. And, my dad, I think definitely was somewhere on the narcissism spectrum, and he, serious womanizing issue, and he kind of made me his, I've said this before, but like his wing child. When I was little, he would take me on dates with him, and then we'd go home to my stepmom and have dinner, and he would lie about where we'd been, and I would be quiet because I wouldn't want to hurt her feelings. And he would talk to me about how he couldn't commit and he needed to be free, and all these women wanted him. I mean, it was just, I really grew up thinking when I was little that my dad was the victim of all these women who just wouldn't share. I mean, it was, I got older and I realized, like, wait a second, sir, like, you're the problem. He also had a real impact on how I felt about myself and what I thought my role was. I certainly was primed and groomed to, try to take on other people, men, other, certainly men, like their problems and solve them and heal them and make them better and, talk to them and be there. Like that's what he primed me for. So, but when he got sick, he had moved when I was 20. He got married for the fourth time. And he had moved, and at the end of his life, he was 95. My half sister, who had been showing up for him and moved him to Georgia and found an assisted living facility near her home and was, taking him to doctor's appointments and managing his veterans benefits and doing all of his primary caregiver responsibilities. And that was all happening at the same time my mother was dying from ALS. And my half sister and I had never been friends. We developed a friendship over the last few years of my dad's life, thankfully, but she suddenly had a stroke and did not make it. And my mom had passed away. I was in the midst of just like crushing grief, and suddenly my half sister passed away. And and there's my dad at an assisted living facility in Georgia, and there was a cousin nearby who was lovely and would go visit him and stuff, but he needed constant help. He was at the point in his life where he needed constant, just help, support, rides to doctors, all that stuff. And, there was just this moment of me realizing, like, that's me. Like, I'm the one, there's nobody else who's going to do it. Now, he had a son from his first marriage. My half sister was from his first marriage as well. He left that marriage and married my mom. He had an affair. He married my mother and had me. The fact that my half sister showed up for him at the end of his life was just like amazing. And his son doesn't speak to him and hasn't for decades. And that's another way to go, right? And it's understandable. Like, this man wasn't there for him, so it's okay. Like, that's how he's, that's his response to that. But for me, I felt like, I'm gonna move him. I'm gonna move him out here to California, and I'm gonna take care of him. Like, I'm gonna find an assisted living facility near me. There was a line for me, I was trying to figure out, okay, I am going to show up for my dad. And it isn't based on what he deserves or what I owe him. It's just, this is my dad, and because I'm in a relationship with myself, and I need to like myself, I'm going to figure out what is the line for me? What am I going to do here for him? And how am I going to show up in the space with him and for him? For me, it's not really about what kind of dad he's been or, what he deserves, because I could have said to myself, well, I'm just going to leave him in Georgia. He's in an assisted living facility. He's safe. And I'm going to leave him there to figure, and I'll be in contact with them. And that's that, but that would not have felt okay to me. I wouldn't have felt good about myself and my decisions. And so, we moved him out here and found a really great place nearby. And I went out there and took care of him, and took him to doctor's appointments and took him to Dunkin' Donuts, which was his, favorite place to go. Took him to lunch and took him to the mall. I mean, I did all the things and took him to AT&T. And I just, took over, dealt with, his veterans benefits and opened a custodial account. And I did all the things, went to the Social Security office, and, I showed up for him a lot, but it wasn't based on what does he deserve or what do I owe him. It was based on who do I want to be in this relationship and in this situation. How do I want to show up here? And there's a lot of freedom in that as well, because it's just you're not wrapped up in what has this other person done or not done, or how they let me down, or what do I owe them, or this tit for tat. Like, I don't want to operate on that level. That's not going to feel good to me. I want to, I want to show up, and I want to show up in a way that feels good. And so maybe that I hope that these ideas are helpful to you if you are in complicated relationships with family members, with, romantic relationships, if there are patterns there, just to really try to look at this stuff in a more objective way with some space, so that you can start deciding where you want to put your energy and where maybe you want to withdraw some energy, or where you want to think about things in where you're not taking them personally, or just recognizing this person's got their own stuff going on. I certainly found it to be very, very helpful in my own life and really healing and empowering. And I hope that it's helpful to you too. And as you move into the end of one year and the beginning of another, it's a good time to think about that space and the relationships that you're having with all the people in your life, but also people you don't know that you're meeting through the day, and with your work and with your body. Like, are you being kind to yourself? And to really try to up the level that you're showing up in these spaces, or also like not show up in certain spaces that don't feel good and that are not kind of worthy of your time and attention. The one other thing that I touched on in the essay that I haven't mentioned here is just this idea. Sometimes when you're in a long-term friendship, people go through crises sometimes in their lives, and I do think that there are times where, like, one or the other person, if you're talking about a very long-term, beautiful relationship, you might have to kind of take that ball of energy and protect it for a little while someone's kind of losing their mind. I've been through that in some friendships where I had to kind of like, I don't know what you're doing right now, but I'm going to kind of unsubscribe from this, and I'm going to take this thing that we've been creating for like 30 years together, and I'm going to bring it over here and wait for you to kind of get back on your, like, in your right mind again. And sometimes people decide they're walking away, they're done, and for whatever reasons, and then you might just be walking away with your memories, and that can be really painful. But it's like, you know how it is. It's not an easy gig being a human being. And so just to kind of give yourself the room to think about these things. Thank you so much for joining me for this talk. I hope it's been helpful to you. I always read the comments and write back. And if you want to reach out to me, I'm pretty easy to find. I'm sending you lots of love and the hope that your 2024 is full of like magic in the space, wherever you are and wherever you go. I hope like some magic and some beautiful energy shows up to meet you. And certainly I hope that you are able to bring out the best in yourself as well and offer up some of your own magic. Thanks for joining me.